Almost. All right, I can smile now.
All right. You can smile now, Peter.
There you go.
No, he's not.
Now you leave.
All right. Good, thanks. Now watch me trip on the floor.
Hello, welcome to the second NetMod. What's that?
Somebody left their sweater.
Please pull the door shut. It's a little loud out there. If someone in the back doesn't mind, Rick, pull the door shut, please. Thank you.
Good.
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome. Thank you for the help on the door. We failed to mention that we have an acting secretary, and we really appreciate his help. He tells us to call him Michael, so we'll do that. There's his name. He's also been really helpful on preparing the notes. He's the first secretary that I've ever worked with that has the session written up before, before the second session, and certainly before the end of the week. So that's a huge win, and we really appreciate his help.
Michael, raise your hand.
Yeah. We have the note well. Late week, we should be familiar with it. Everything you say here becomes part of our record, and you have certain obligations if you contribute to the IETF. Yes. We are, again, running recordings. Please use the microphone. Make sure you say your name. We do have the Jabber room going. I'm about to jump in. If anyone else wants to jump in, that'd be great. Most importantly, we have Etherpad for collective crowdsourced note-taking. Please join. Please contribute, even if it's just fixing someone else's edits. We're in our second session. We have an agenda. Now, with that, this wasn't updated. Who's giving these slides? Phil's going to be giving these slides. Phil, are you here? Phil, are you here?
Let me text him.
Okay. Dan, are you here? That would be great. I guess we're moving too quickly. I bet. Let's try our third presenter, Shufang. He's here. He is reliable as always. I think we're going to start off with Shufang. And then we'll end up going out of order. Just one last little peek. Etherpad. It's off the tools pages if you can't get there.
You have a clicker. Shuffle.
And this is called, which one is this? This is schedule.
Oh, Phil's here. You want to go back in order?
All right, so Phil came in just in time.
You want to?
So we'll take Phil.
Yeah.
Where's Phil?
Yeah, he's right here.
Phil, I don't see. Oh, there you are.
Standing up.
I was looking at the end of it at the door. But Shufang, we'll make sure you have your full time because being reliable. So this is.
Sorry about that. I got sidetracked into a long conversation on internationalization because there aren't any short conversations. Sorry. So yesterday we had.
I'm just not finding them. Hold on.
I'll go ahead and start. So yesterday we had a breakout meeting in the afternoon. It was 1:30 to 7, and we thought we were joking when Kent gave us that many hours, and it turns out we actually used them all. It was, I think, yeah, that's the one. It was a positive meeting. It was, I think, it confirmed the design of the design team.
Yeah. says PowerPoint crash. We'll see whether the clicker works.
No.
We'll try one more time.
It was in general a positive experience. Things went well. There were some issues with the draft. The big thing, lots of questions, lots of clarifications. We walked through the implications and the issues section from the presentation Tuesday, and had some answers, and some still remain open issues. The big things were more examples and more descriptive text. I think the draft covers the material, but it covers it very briefly, and I think we'd be better serviced by more in-depth discussions, in turning some of the discussions of the design team into text in the draft instead of just presenting the conclusion. And so we'll do that essentially through examples. There's also the issue of timeliness. Eric had the point that data in running essentially appears immediately, sorry, I don't want to say immediately, appears in sync with intended. The two are lockstep. And there's also a lockstep relationship between applied and operational state, simply because applied can be viewed as a subset of operational state. So those two need to be, that point needs to be more clearly made, that those really are bound together. The other issue we discussed was factory default configurations. A lot of devices, when they start up, will, if the config is length 0, or if they know it's the first boot, or if some magic happens, they will load a default configuration. This is in running or in candidate, and it's typically just a static file that gets loaded to point users in the right direction. But we want to call that out in the draft as expected behavior. So I want to walk through some of the examples I'm going to add and make sure, because I think these, because I want to do two things. I want to use them as a mechanism of explaining the draft, and also as a means of saying this is what we're going to put in, so that you're aware of the ongoing work. The first example will be a just straightforward configuration, a full walkthrough from edit config payload into running, intended, applied, and operational state. What you can expect in each of the databases, how they'll behave, and at the same time we'll discuss perhaps an example of inactive or template or something to make that more, to give an example of that. The second example we discussed was system controlled configuration. An example of this would be a loopback interface where your LO0 shows up implicitly in your configuration. Let's say it shows up with a 127.0.0.1 address, whether the user likes it or not. If you commit, you'll see that in applied and operational state with the origin of system. If the user then steps into the configuration and creates explicitly in their configuration database that LO0 interface and adds, say, a couple of more knobs to it, then that interface will now show up in running and in intended and in applied and operational state, and the origin will be static. It's a good example of the different types and how they how the flow between the database happens. The third example would be a Bgp Peer List. This is something that's explicitly created in running. It's fully populated in applied and in op state. And what I mean by fully populated is no leafs that aren't specified in the configuration will show up in operational state. For example, a local address and a local port that are left unconfigured will show up in the applied and operational state configuration. I think that's a typo. These will show up in operational state, but not in applied, because they'll show up as system. And system doesn't appear in applied. My mistake.
Phil, sorry, Jason Stern here. I think on the previous slide, we might have had a similar gotcha on the loopback interface, right? That doesn't, does that one show up in applied, or does it show up in system as well? Just in, sorry, oper state?
Yes, it is. I've made that mistake here as well.
Okay.
So this will appear in operational state, not applied. So let's say you go into your configuration, you delete five peers and do a commit. There will be a time lag before those peers are actually removed from applied. They'll continue to exist. You'll be able to see them as the responsible system subcomponent steps up and does the work. As sockets close and resources are released, they will disappear from applied and operational state. The fourth example will be ephemeral data, and this is ephemeral in the ephemeral interface terminology. This is interface is created and running. It has no installed fru, so it doesn't appear in applied or operational state. When you plug in your fru, the responsible system subcomponent will create the interface and populate it with the data from intended. And when the fru is created, it will actually, or it may, depending on the data model, create additional objects like ports on an interface. Whether the ports are configured or not, they will appear in the operational state at that point. Field replaceable unit, yes. Sorry.
Please repeat or go to the microphone.
The question is, what does FRU stand for? And FRU is field replaceable unit. I think that's a standard industry term, but
AC, please use the microphone.
Yeah. One other minor point that was made during the breakout was when you insert a FRU, the statistics for that interface should be reset to 0. It should be a fresh, new interface. You shouldn't reclaim, interface statistics should not persist from a previous incarnation of that object. And the key here, which I think is made in, this point is made in the Yang RFC as well. The key is that we don't want FRUs to break configuration. Your configuration state, your configuration validity should not depend on FRUs in the box. If something can be removed and inserted, that's operational state, which should not affect the validity of your configuration. And the other point was this is only FRU related. If you have virtual or logical or pseudo interfaces, these will appear regardless of configuration, and they may appear regardless of supporting ephemeral instances. For example, if you make a lag interface with 5 members, 5 member interfaces, and none of those appear on the box, the lag interface itself will appear regardless of the state of the FRUs under it. Sorry, the lag interface will appear in applied and operational state. Of course, because it's configured, it will appear in intended and running. And the fifth example, it will be dynamic data. We don't really want to step at this point into solving all of the ITRS problems, but we want to give a direction of how this facility can be used to solve those problems. We want to talk about how data is merged between dynamic data stores and intended into active. And while writing this slide, I think I came up with another issue from the draft. In the original picture, we had lines going into our data stream between active and operational state. And I don't believe that's accurate, because operational state is a proper subset of, active is a proper subset of operational state. So all the config true knobs in operational state should appear in active. No, never mind. I'm incorrect because we talked about origin. Never mind. All right, so that's not an issue.
So do you mean applied when you say active?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, applied. Sorry. Clearly, I have not gotten over jet lag even now as I head back.
Phil, do you have a drawing of that later? Because do you have a drawing of that later?
No, but
Okay, so the rest of us will just be confused at the conversation that just happened there. But thanks.
I can send you one.
no, I simply used the wrong term. I was saying active, and what I meant was applied.
Okay. But he doesn't have it.
So we went through the issues list. The first issue was, do we need an active? Which is why it's stuck in my head. Do we need an active data store simply for the removal of inactive nodes? And the consensus in the breakout session was that we do not. That intended serves that purpose, and it serves it without specifying how any templating mechanism or expansion interacts with inactive, and we can continue to ignore that until it's defined. We talked a bit about the constraints on applied and operational state. In general, there's a feeling that these should apply, but the device should be able to send data as accurately as possible. For example, if there's a constraint that says min elements is 7 and you actually have 1, you should send that you have 1. You shouldn't feel like you have to make up 6 fake ones simply to satisfy the constraint of the data model. The particular one that we really feel should be like a very, very should is when, because that will break expectations of what data is received. If you say this augmentation happens when the interface type is sonnet, and you start showing those that object on Ethernet or any other interface type, the receiver will be quite surprised. In general, we want to apply the Pastel principle, so be as accurate as you can and be as relaxed as you can on the receiving side.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. Just think about it, would also choice statements fit again into that should category, do you think? They're not very similar to when.
Yeah, I think again, it's a sliding scale. We want to push people as far toward must as possible without actually saying must.
Yep.
So these are very, very, very shoulds.
Okay. Thanks.
We talked a bit. So the next issue was applied in RESTconf, and after talking about it a bit, we decided that that wasn't an issue we were going to take on. We were going to push it off to the NetConf working group. In general, I just want to remark that there's still a disagreement about the goals of RESTconf. Is it another means of getting to NetConf, or is it some sort of easy button for programmers who want an easy button? And that's really, at this point, we should have an answer to that, and we don't seem to. So that's kind of surprising.
Okay, great, thanks. Anybody have any comments or questions? All right, how many people have read the draft? A good number. And how many people, we'd like to poll for consensus on adopting the draft. So how many people would like to adopt the draft? A good number.
Interesting, that's approximately the same, but it's more than who have read the draft. I think that shows the appetite for a solution to this problem.
And we can't see the hands raised on Meet Echo, but I assume. Okay, so we'll take the call for adoption to the mailing list. Thank you, Phil.
Dan, I think you're up next. Just run it from here. See if this works.
So we just go back 6 minutes. Good.
Hi, Dejan Bogdanovic on behalf of the design team, presenting the work, the update on the things that have been working since the Berlin IETF. Since then, we added 3 new members to the design team, Eben Arias, Zhu Feng Liu, and Yingzhen Zhu. So kudos to them and to the new work and energy they're bringing to the team. Next slide, please. Do you have a clicker?
Okay, I'll press.
Phil, do you have the clicker? Phil, did you walk away with the clicker?
No, it's right there on the table.
Oh, it's black on black. Yeah. Okay, so it will be a short recap of the status and draft-specific discussion, and then if we have time at the end, we might go for some examples. The current work is that we have 3 drafts now in process. That from a single draft that we were working on, we have split it up into 3 different drafts, and some of those drafts are moving forward, but we have something pending on the op state and the operational state, and we added some new conventions, and we are planning to expand on the model classification draft that has been done by some other authors, which I was one of them. So when we started originally, we started with a meta model for the whole device. And as we were building that, we were realizing that the elements that we have to build inside this one draft was getting too complicated, and we split it up into 3 drafts. So the basic, essentially, draft, the device model draft, how to organize, is essentially a very simple draft, which says just the basics of the model, and then the logics of that are in the LNE and in the NI. So the 2 drafts, the logical network element and the network instance, they are providing how you can build administrative domain elements and just how to do routing and switching separation. Okay, I think so on that part is when we were creating the LNE model and the NI model, the idea there is that you get a basic object and then you're assigning resources to that object. Because we have to assign multiple, and we don't know what the user within the administrative domain wants to run, what protocols, what interfaces have to be assigned, and not all LNEs are created the same. We had to find out how to mount external modules into that module that has been created. For that, we have been using schema mount, and for most of the use cases, the schema mount is answering the requirements, but for some of them, we had to come up with some new ideas, and for that, we have here a proposal. Okay. So the key requirements, essentially that any data module can be instantiated within the logical network element. This is the key requirement, because once the logical network element is created, it has like a system ID, it has a few basic system management information. So essentially think about a hardware device model without the hardware specifics, only the hardware specifics like CPU, amount of memory, disk, all that is just modeled at the top level, at essentially the hardware level device, and then all the LNEs have what is necessary for the system management, and that's the basic element. After that, the administrator of that device is adding resources like interfaces to that, is adding hardware resources like interface and QoS capabilities to that LNE, and then the administrator of that LNE is starting to mount network modules that they need inside that LNE. That means they will mount protocols they want to use and other network services that they need for that one and they want to administer by themselves. So the problem there is that it works nicely for most network services, except for hardware-specific resources like interface. And we had to figure out how can we schema mount an interface without, because that's a shared resource, and then how to figure out how to share that resource between two administrative domains. So as we are mounting all the modules relative to the mount point, so once we have created the basic, okay.
Can you go back to the previous slide one second, because you skipped over the thing about RPC operations, and I was just going to point out that actions and nested notifications will just work. They just, you know, it's just a different path to the node, and they can still work, and they're relocatable. RPCs are always at the top level, and they're always going to be a problem because the top level you want to shift down into the LNE. But actions, if you don't use RPC and you use action instead, then this would work.
One more question to this slide. Do you expect that all modules will be available in advance in the moment that you construct the data model, or before you start provisioning the virtual devices?
That would be ideal that they would be all available, but from the real life use cases, that will definitely, we will have to see how, because people might add modules later after the LNE has been instantiated, and then how to add those new modules that has been created. Because the question is how, once you create an LNE and you have a new service that you want to add to that LNE, how will you add it to it? Will it be, can I add it to a live LNE, or will I have to destroy it and then, you know, rebuild it?
Okay.
Lada, before you go away, two things. Was your question about schema mount in general, or about the LNE and NI usage of schema mount?
No, in schema mount in general, we assume that there will be use cases similar to peer mount, where really the schema is supplied dynamically at runtime.
Okay, great.
But I was wondering whether it could be also this case, or if you really assume that you can just, you know everything in advance.
No, we have to allow for both. Before you go, the prior comment from Andy was really a schema mount comment, not a LNE
right,
comment.
But this is mentioned in the schema mount draft that essentially RPCs become action. That's what we have already. So that's just
okay. So Andy, I don't know if you heard that answer, but all right, thanks.
Yeah. So the schema mount XPath issues for the mainly what we've seen so far is for interfaces which are shared resources, because the physical interfaces belong to the top level device, to the top level LNE, and from there we have to assign them to the child LNEs based on how, you know, based on administrative decisions, how many interfaces will be assigned to a particular LNE. Is it 1 or 100? We never know. That depends on the device, you know, capacity. So we have, you know, essentially some ideas how to solve that. We've been looking into the HTTP protocol in order, you know, how to do that. It's the mod rewrite, and if somebody else has some other ideas how to do that, this would be, you know, for discussion, and we discussed it with Lada.
I think that there is some confusion about terminology here, because even if you use absolute XPath, it means that even if it is absolute, that it's really confined to the mounted data tree, right? So that the root that addressed by a slash in an XPath expression is just the mount point. So there is no, currently no way.
The root is relative to the mount point. Yeah.
Right. So what we are talking about is to either invent some notation how to get out of this mount jail, so to say, and reach something that's outside, or, which I think is maybe a better approach that Lou suggested, to invent some way how the mounted data tree can borrow stuff from like some kind of symbolic link or things like that. So we have to really discuss this.
So we have to always, there are some complications there because we have to think about the administrative rights to access this information as you're going down. Because if you're creating administrative domain within the administrative domain, but it doesn't then also pass the administrative rights from the upper domain to the lower domain. The lower box can be a completely black box, and you have then to make sure that you cannot read from one to the other, and essentially you can't go reading from top to down and vice versa from down to the top. So on the upstate, we are essentially tracking what the NetMod design team is doing. In many places, we are leaving the upstate, as the placeholder, and based on that, what the design team will come up with the recommendations, and how will they, do that. We will essentially follow up on that. So on the so essentially just on this the RFC 6087, I think this is from the last one. This wasn't updated. I think that was public.
I think so routing config is now published.
Yes.
So that's
so that's a published one.
So that's published, and 6087 BIS is in the pipeline.
Oh, okay. So in that case, based on this new recommendations, when they come out, we will, and with the, as the work will process on that part, we'll be upgrading between the versions, the drafts that we are, working on. So on the conventions, this is, the kudos to the new guys that have joined us, and they have been working on that. On that part, I am a little bit weak because I, read it, but on going into details, if you ask me, I'll have to ask if somebody from the yeah, he's here, so he will be able, to give you more information and provide you with more details on that part. But essentially, what we have done is we initially, what the team did is the initial set was defined and it was put into a draft. So getting feedback from the working group would be appreciated, and some reviews of that version on the mailing list are welcome. On the model classification, based on the Benoit,
on the previous one, it's a very good item. Don't try to make it perfect. We need types now. The value will be whenever it will be reused by all different Yang models. One more thing, we created in the hackathon Yang model search, in which you can have like any field search on the type def. You can search type def on the entire set of Yang models that I know of, and make sure that you have the consistent set of types. That would be great work.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for the comments. Since you mentioned this scope not need to be perfect, so what about the address you mentioned, the group broadcasting address? Do we want to include this or not? Remember you have a comment about this multicast address.
So a type def for
type def for multicast. This is just one of the examples. Right? I was reviewing a document in which there was a multicast type def, and then I was relating to your draft. I was asking a question: should we include that there? Now, I don't have the answer to that. You decide, but whatever you do, make sure it's consistent across all Yang models. If not consistent, discuss with the author why it's not, and publish fast.
Michael from Huawei, and just the same question about the multicast Yang type. We defined this multicast Yang type in the generic OEM Yang module. Since we need this multicast to, to use in the CC and CVs, RPCs, but we don't find the same definition in the young type on earnest young type. So we just defined it, and we don't want to define it in the. I'm not a strong feeling to decide to find it into the Lime module, but we also want to reuse another young works. So perhaps we can discuss whether it is fit to define this type.
Well, it's it's I said please provide feedback and desired additions.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I think it's the same type. I'm not sure, but even if it's a different, even if it is a different type, I think the point holds. Are you suggesting that you'd like to see some more types in Shufang's document, or are you saying that we need to figure out where it goes?
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
so Shufang just said that it is the same type,
that's
and that's where
why
it came from.
multicast type is defined in the Lime, the working group. So we don't strongly willing to define here, and also define in the Lime. So we just want to reuse the type, and it also can define anywhere else it can fit it. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you.
AC Lindum, Cisco Systems and Routing Yang Design Team. Yeah, I think what Benoit said is for this to be useful, we have to move fast on it so that we can't make it be a bottleneck for the other models that we want to get in the initial set and standardize them. But if you could move fast on what things you think would be common to others and send them to us.
I'd like
I'm a co-author as well.
Yeah, yes, I like to hear that, and like to contribute this to whatever what kind of young types tools. Okay.
That's great, thank you. So one interesting thing here is to note that this document is well, it's coming from the Routing Yang Design Team. Their product is aimed at the routing working group. So that means that there's some common types that are headed there rather than here. From my standpoint, I just want them defined, and it's not so important to me what model they come in, but I want to make sure that the group is aware that some common type defs are going on there, and I want to make sure our AD doesn't want to object, and my co-chair too, of course.
Yeah, also I think time check, you have three minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. So on the model classification, it grew out, from the organizational model that, we were discussing over the last couple of meetings. There is a draft that discussed module classification, but that was just, giving basic guidelines. And the idea there was that the developer of the modules are able to classify, because they know the intention of the module, so they can do a basic classification. Is it the device module or is it the service module? But then there was more classification needed, because in order really to be able to search, the idea is that Chris Hobbs came up with is to add tags, that the author can add tags to the module, and based on that be able to get it better classification as well, better searchability on that. This tagging mechanism, there are some different thoughts, but some of them is to be completely just unstructured string, and the other one is to put at least some guidelines on how to do it, but leave majority of that tag to be privately constructed, because as you know, each librarian might have their own way how to do structuring of the books or the data what they are keeping. So for that reason, we want to make it flexible for the developers, that they can, or within a certain organization, that they can create that string according to their internal needs. Yeah.
Yeah, this one used to say, remember?
Just a second.
So there are more details here, but come to the routing working group.
Yeah.
That they're going to be presented there.
Yeah. Yeah, because this was like the examples and the.
Yeah. It's all right. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was like...
Slide over right. Well.
Shufang?
This one.
Hi, I'm Xufeng Liu. This draft is by Helen Chen, and she cannot be here today, so I just do the presentation instead. So we have some specification requirement here. Each namespace in the model need to be unique globally, and also the module name and the submodule names all need to be unique. So what do we do with this issue? Currently,
Sorry, I'm sorry. Before you get into this, I just want to let everybody know, at the end of this presentation, we're going to ask for a call for adoption.
Right.
So please pay attention. Thanks.
Yeah. So this the draft was presented here before and also got comments. So there are some revisions and updated after that. So the draft is trying to solve the issue about how do we do the naming. So currently, many companies are writing their own enterprise models and with different ways. Some use the URL, some use the URN, and each has its own convention. So there's a risk to have the name conflict. So here, basically, we're trying to define a top-level name. So then after this top-level names, and each organization can refine the name and define the subsystem for their own naming convention. So what's this top-level name? We can still discuss and get consensus. But here, the current proposal is RDNS, reverse DNS. So here the grammar would be like this. So at top level, you have this keyword. So we will register that to IANA. And after that, you have a reserved DNS string, and then the organization can put whatever they want afterwards. So here, example would be, say, some company, company want to have their own OSPF model. So what they do will be, after there's a top level name, they put the com example and then put the young name there. That's their own name. So, that's it. So this is the request for this name registration was written in another draft. So also reviewed. So basically we come to the working group trying to get consensus. So we need to have this because many implementations are going. So we will be better to have this resolved soon so that they can have the naming.
Right. Mahesh, Cisco Systems. So when you talk about modules, are these vendor-specific modules, or these are modules that are extensions of standard models? Which models are we talking on specifically about?
So those are for the vendor-specific modules, but if a vendor trying to augment the standard module, then can be followed into this category anyway. So this is your own augmentation. So if you don't want to standardize, nobody will care. So you have your own naming convention. That's up to you.
Okay,
right?
so you're clearly saying that this is for augmentations of standard Yang models. That's
right.
where this applies.
Right.
Okay.
Or vendor-specific models.
Yeah, yeah, either way.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, so if it refers to vendor-specific models, we have a problem in the sense that what happens to existing models that have already been published by a particular vendor? We will not be able to go through a namespace change without impacting our ISSU. Cisco, for example, has already published models that customers are using. And if you're asking us to change the name, it's going to impact ISSU at this point.
That's a good point. So this is limited to new modules, like revision 0 type modules, right?
Right. Then it'll be up to Cisco's product planning, and so if you want to continue to use the old one, and for new ones, can do this way.
Okay, I think then we probably want to make it clear what, I mean, I don't know if you want to just leave it to Cisco or any vendor to choose which one it is applicable and which one it is not applicable for. I think you might want to specify.
What are you doing now?
We have, I can bring up the specific string, but it's certainly not this format.
Is there a convention that you're using that could be compatible with this? And then we could add a backward compatibility section that describes how to be compatible. But then we also have to figure out if there's some commonality there.
Right. So backward compatibility. Okay, that'll be interesting to see how it matches into the existing string. Let me first look at what we have, and I can tell you whether. But to tell you, yes, Cisco has defined a set of URNs that all our models are supposed to use.
Rob Wilson, Cisco.
Back mic.
So Tim Carey, just to let you know, we've done the same thing with the BBF. We've we've standardized what we put for our Yang modules for our templates, and we actually just do it a little bit different. We use the we don't do Yang then the company. We do the company then the Yang. So we just kind of swap those two positions around a bit. So it's URN, BBF. Yang, then whatever we do, right?
Well, here, since you already have BBF, right? So I think you're fine. So you already registered BBF. Here is for the company. They don't have registered anything. So at the top level, we'll have potential conflict.
So where's that conflict come in? I don't understand.
So URN, after URN, say you may have URN com.cisco and another people, for some other organization, URN com.Ericsson. Also, then you may have URL, US, URL DT, the whatever. So that because you can use anything, right? So here there's no rules here. So here we only trying to suggest a top level token. So equivalent to your BBS. BBS is fine. You already have BBS. IETF is also fine. All standard model following URN IETF.
All right, so your top level is to indicate that this is an IETF. What's the top level?
All the standard model currently started with URN IETF, so which is already unique. We already have our own space.
Okay.
For BBF, you already have URN BBF. You are fine also.
Right.
But for the private enterprise model, we don't have any way to start.
So
Okay.
instead of RDNS or Yang, there could be a potential
Yeah.
collision because people are just choosing whatever they want to choose. So he's providing some structure here so that there's to deconflict.
All right, so this is only going to deal with organizations that have not standardized their URNs. Okay.
Right.
All right, I just wanted to make sure. Thank
Yeah.
So Rob Wilson, Cisco. So my question is just a clarifying one. Is this an optional thing to use, or is it mandatory that all modules should use this going forward?
I say up to the working group.
It's your proposal.
The proposal, Helen's proposal event was experimental, I thought. Can you look at?
But
so my question is this just a scheme? This is a recommendation. You should do it this way, but you don't have to. If you're doing a different way that works, that's fine.
I think it's going to have to be a recommendation, and that in fact, the existing namespace using HTTP would still be valid, but there'd be a 6087 biz that would
recommend
suggest people to use URN because it doesn't have the appearance of a URL that you can click on and resolve to a page.
Yeah.
So it's better that way.
Yeah.
But of course, if Cisco or others, SDOs are using URNs of their own, that's fine as well.
Yep.
So I think we have to support that. So again, just a recommendation.
Yep.
By the way, it's informational right now. It is how it's written.
Okay.
Mahesh, Cisco Systems. So I'm glad it's going to be a recommendation, not a requirement, because I just checked.
We haven't decided what we're doing.
Okay.
This is an individual document.
All right, let's hope that's the direction they go into. But just an update on, so we use HTTP. So we are using a URL. We are not even using a URL at this point.
Yeah, that follow in the URL category. I'm done.
You're done.
Oh, okay.
So you.
Great. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we'd like to do a call for adoption. But first, how many people have read this draft?
Before we ask that question, how many think this is a useful function? Whether or not it's specified, whether it's this draft or another different draft, how many think that this type of function is useful? So that seems like a really good number.
That's more than the upstate discussion.
Phil Schaefer, Juniper Networks. I guess I'm really lost then, because what problem is it really solving? I mean, what is the problem that, given that we have, what I guess that what problem
to me,
is being
I
solved
see
here?
it as it's giving a deconflicted namespace for private modules that doesn't look like a clickable URL.
The latter part's the more important part of it, that it doesn't look like a clickable URL that you can resolve to a page. It
And
doesn't
why
need
is
to
that
be
an
URL.
issue? Given that these are URIs and they're opaque strings, the fact that it might point to something useful is something useful, not something unuseful.
Well, apparently the previous presenter, the original presenter said that there was issues, that people were always thinking that it would resolve to a page and they never did, and there were complaints about it. So we're trying to resolve those complaints at the moment.
But we also can have potential name conflicts, right? So we all do independently. So it's if you're going to URL category, so how we need to check the URL not conflicting with some other URLs then.
So so assumably the string follows the URL standard, and there's a element that is the host name or the domain name of the publisher.
Well, the model may not have a domain name. So I write a YAML model, not necessarily I need to have a domain name.
You're right, but if you don't, then you're.
What do we do?
So think of it this way. The proposal is for the case that you are using a namespace that begins URN and it's a private namespace, here's a format that must be followed. Is that something?
Maybe.
No, must be followed. If you start with URN and doing private, if we go down this path, it'll be a must. Is that something that's worthwhile? So you can still start with HTTP. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just because you're not doing a URN. I'm not advocating. I'm stating what the options are.
Okay.
Is that it? Would that be acceptable to you, or from your perspective?
Again, I can't imagine anyone using this, but that must be me. This goes into the bucket of things I don't care about and things that aren't useful.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something, and it seems like I'm not.
It seems like there's a class of people who care about this, and there's a class that don't.
Okay.
That's the way I read it. The question is there enough in the working group who read it that as useful that we should pursue it as a working group? I do agree that we shouldn't and can't break current usage.
Okay, Mahesh, Cisco Systems. So is the fact that if a URL leads to a link that returns a 404, I mean, isn't that to some extent vendor's problem to fix if they want to really fix it? I mean, is that a big issue?
Personally, I agree with you. But that's my personal position, not chair position. So again, how many think that this type of solution is something we should be, excuse me, working on? Is this a problem we should be addressing in the working group? So it's less people, but I think it's still a reasonable number. How many think it's completely useless? I'm going to ask a third question after this. Completely uninterested. So it's slightly less. How many think that it's a mistake for us to go down this path? You have one. Okay. So, Kent, do you want to poll or do you want?
Go ahead.
No.
Good. All right. So how many people have read this draft? Okay. And how many people would like to adopt this as a working group item? Okay, good number. Can't see anything on Meet Echo. We'll confirm the adoption on the list.
All right, so we have a reasonable number on both of those. Sorry.
All right, last present.
Now this one's going to be, oh, go ahead.
Sanal?
This one's a little unusual in terms of what we normally do. This isn't a proposal, but more of a report on some experience of a specific implementation. As a chair, I'm a little uncomfortable that the culprit name is being mentioned so much, but I still think it's valuable information to hear about an implementation. So next time you do an implementation report, just drop off your company name from all over the place. Oh, you changed it. Okay. So
it's only on the first slide now.
All right, sorry. Never mind. Thank you for anticipating my comment.
So thanks to the chair and to Mahesh for giving me the opportunity to present Cisco's implementation.
Bring the microphone a little bit closer.
Okay, so the agenda of this slide is that we'll talk about IETF's rule name handling and Cisco's rule name handling, and we'll see how this pans out in all the edit config operations, and then we'll see how Cisco augmented the IETF interface model to accommodate the application of the ACL on the interface. Oh, sorry. Okay. So the problem here is that the sequence key in the IETF model for an ACE is the alphanumeric string. Well, it's not the problem. IETF model defines it that way. In iOS XR, per ACE, we configured the ACE on a sequence number. So we had a problem on how we map the rule name to a sequence number. Now, this was a problem because all our data structures, our system data stores, everything indexed by a sequence number. And when we have to change things to accommodate an alphanumeric string, it really became an issue. So we came up with an algorithm on how we reuse Cisco's current implementation, and we accommodate the IETF alphanumeric string as well. So there are 4 steps to the high-level algorithm. The first step is that when we get a Yang data tree request, an edit config request, we first look up the sysdb data store to find the existing ACL. And we create a on-the-fly data structure to represent this. We then read all the edit config operations in the Yang framework data tree. And we then walk through the data tree to generate sequence numbers with the given alphanumeric strings. And at this point, in step number 3, we actually have the ACL on how it would look when you commit it. And the 4th step is to commit the configuration in the system database and also trigger hardware updates. So in RSC 6020, the create, merge, replace, delete, and remove were the 5 edit config operations. So we have implemented all 5 as well as get, which includes get and get config. So here is a get, these are just some examples I'm going to run through. So here is a get config example. So we have an access list ACL1. And what we see is that we're trying to get all the ACLs of type V4. And we see on the right side that the V4 ACLs have been returned.
We're running out of time, so can you jump to, like, if you have a specific, like, whatever you can to tie this up?
Sure. So this is a replace. So this actually just tells us the algorithm. I have a few examples on this, but we can go through create. So let's say before we had an ACL with sequence numbers 10, 20, 30, and the alphanumeric strings A, B, and C. So on the right side, so we actually have an algorithm that maps 10 to A, 20 to B, and 30 to C. So now let's just say we had to create a D. So because the default operation is to put it right at the end, we see that D gets 40/D in our system database. So this is when we also have, we use the first, last, before, and after in the insert operations. When they say insert D after B, you see that D gets inserted after B, the sequence number, the new sequence number is generated, and you have C occurring after D. Replace is kind of interesting because here you have, just say you want to replace B with E and insert after A. So what you do is that you find where B is, you replace it with E, and also put B in the delete queue, because that is a specific delete request that has to go. And you insert E, giving it a sequence number, and followed by C, whose sequence number is unchanged. Delete is fairly straightforward. The last slide deals with how Cisco augmented the IETF ACL model. This is a fairly simple augmentation where you have, in the ingress and egress, you can have a V4, V6, and ES ACL. And this particular example only allows one ACL, but I think as we progress, there'll be further extensions to this, because different platforms in running XR accommodate different number of ACLs on the interface.
All right, Sanal, thank you.
Very quick one.
Yeah.
AC Lindum Cisco. You didn't state there's no IPR on this, right?
I'm sorry?
Is there any IPR on this?
There's no IPR.
Okay, great. Thanks.
As Shepherd, I previously pulled for IPR. There was none. And also, yeah, it's okay, cool. And also, so thank you for showing this implementation. Also, Dan Bogdanovic also had mentioned that Volta had done an implementation of the ACL draft. So 2 implementations. This is great. And as the Shepherd, I'm going to make it. It's a very easy write-up for me. So thank you very much. And oh, sorry, Dan wanted to say something.
Yeah. Well, we found out in the Young model that we could do optimization in the IETF packet header, in the IETF packet header model, because we did the leaves for the header matching instead of using a leaf list. If we would change from leaf to leaf list, it would allow us to create entries. AC entries, I want to say terms, but it's AC entries where we could have multiple match conditions in a single line with an action.
At the risk of keeping everybody from lunch, that only applies to fields that are the same, that are exactly the same type. The source and dest address it applies to, but like other fields, you couldn't put it in that list. So it only optimizes for those 2, right?
If you support mixed models, you could then if you support mixed types, then you could have even like MAC and IP.
So let's take this to the list. I think you already put an email to the list, right, Dan? And I need to reply to that as Shepherd and decide whether or not we need to pull this back to the working group consideration. But to my impression, it looks like it's a vector. A scalar is becoming a vector, and it's a safe change, and we don't really need to bring it back to the working group. But again, I'll confer. Blue sheets, and if you haven't filled in the blue sheet, can you please ensure that you've filled in the blue sheet? Do we know where the blue sheets are located currently?
Hold up the blue sheet if you have it.
I think
Tim's
got one
in the back. Great.
Okay.
Do you want to mention NetCom?
No,
Okay, so there's going to be more discussion in NetConf on what's happening with the multiple data stores and revised data stores. So if you're interested in the topic, it would be good to show up there.
In this afternoon, second session, NetConf.
What did I say?
You didn't specify which session.
Oh, sorry, NetConf. I thought I said that.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Oh.
Because there was a fairly obvious techniques in there.
Oh.
But I have seen in my career fairly obvious things that people get their companies to file IPR on, so that's why I asked.
Oh, thank you, Ben.
Yes.
because that was just an IETF contribution.
Yeah, you were just